Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is a discussion of the first chapter in the Yin and Yang book, Entering a Noir World in the Classroom by Mary T. Crystal. There's a high school teacher who's come up with a pretty interesting project. And some of you were particularly excited about this. I talked to Seth. He had mentioned that he's a big fan of this genre, so this was exciting for him. And Jennifer had posted a nugget. I thought her nugget was interesting because she said even though she wasn't initially interested in this genre, when the author talked about how it could connect to sort of what adolescents go through in their daily lives, I guess she saw a connection there that was intriguing. So I want to bring up a couple points in this, couple of quotations from this reading, and maybe get us into some deeper discussion of some of the issues it raises, especially in light of the Rancière book. Sorry, my brain is still thawing out. All right, so let's start with this quotation here. So one of the things I always look for in a chapter like this, where it is focused mostly on practical things or classroom activities, things you can do with this information, is sort of the exigence for it. Why bother? There's so many different things you can look at. Why look at detective fiction, for example? And I'm not sure that I'm completely satisfied with Crystal's answers to these, her reasons, but maybe you are, so I think it'd be good fodder for discussion. Anyway, she says here on page 9, for reluctant readers, the study of detective literature and film provides text that meet students at their interest and reading levels in a fashion where more typical choices do not succeed. So this is an attitude or position that goes at least as far back as Quintilian. If you've read Quintilian's Institutes of Oratory, one of the things he complained about, and this was back in ancient Rome, was that just having students read, for example, the famous speeches of Cicero, let's say, or I guess even further back than that, the language is kind of obsolete at that point. The issues were historical, not contemporary, and so what Quintilian said was just go, have the students bring in some compositions that they enjoyed reading or hearing on their own, and then use that as the basis to talk about rhetoric. So I don't think Crystal's too far removed from that attitude with this comment here. Maybe the students don't want to read The Great Gatsby, let's say, but maybe something by Raymond Chandler might fit the bill more. So the only problem with this attitude or rationale here, I think, is that she talks a lot about how the students aren't familiar with film noir or these hard-boiled detective stories. So even, it's still something they're unfamiliar with. It's not something they would have read on their own. So I'm kind of wondering about that. How do you resolve that paradox? If you want to talk about something that, meets the students at their own level, let's say, but at the same time, you have an interest. You can't learn everything, right? So apparently, Mary Crystal has a lot of interest in this genre. So how do you where do you sort of come down on this? Is Crystal kind of just trading one unknown for another as far as the students are concerned, or is she right? There's something special about this genre. Okay, so then she gets more into how do you actually do this. And she says, well, with any form of genre study, the reader needs to understand the rules of the game. So again, I sort of emphasize that just like with The Great Gatsby or any other work of American literature from this era, the students don't already have a knowledge of the conventions of the genre. So they're still having to do some work here. She says there's two ways, discovery or application. And for my money, I'm going to go with the first one, I think being more in line with what Rancière would want. So instead of coming to the students with a template, some kind of a list of conventions that they can watch a couple of clips of Castle or whatever and then just apply the template. Instead, they're kind of deriving their own template. I think this would work better. I mean, if Rancière, when he talked about the ignorant schoolmaster, I kept thinking of how this project would be very different if Crystal was also unaware of film noir and didn't know anything about hard-boiled detective fiction. And so she was kind of on the same level with the students trying to work out these genre conventions. I think that, for my money, that would be a much more enjoyable class, or at least more educational maybe more problematic. But what do you think about that? That question. Let me try to. So would it be better, you think, as far as Rancière is concerned, or as you're concerned, if Crystal had used some kind of genre that she was as unfamiliar with as her students, or is she better off choosing something that she's got a lot of expertise in and knows a lot about the conventions already? So I'll just pass that on to you. Let me hear your thoughts on that. Then we get to what I would see probably as the strongest, the clearest statement of exigence, or some sort of the so what question, in the passage. And it's a very long sentence, but it goes something like this. So these texts can provide a platform for examination of how a genre builds a set of clearly definable and durable conventions addressing setting, plot, character, and point of view that would augment the study of genre fiction as one of several genres treated, canonical text covered in the survey of American literature, as well as an investigation of detective literature's origins in the 19th century and the adaptation of pulp fiction novels to 20th century Hollywood films. To drink a little coffee after that. Thank you, excuse me. So huge sentence, a lot of big claims here. They're trying to work through this. So these texts, so the film noir movies or the hard-boiled stories, so these are a platform for examination of, I guess, genres in general. The implication being that if you can learn how to analyze one genre and figure out the conventions of one genre, you could apply that to other genres. So that makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, I use a similar strategy in my Writing in the Professions course. We start with a resume and talk about the conventions of resumes and how some aspects are pretty clearly defined. For example, there's usually a section in there about education and history of work or past jobs or whatnot. And from that, once we can sort of figure out how to analyze a document like a resume in a business context, you can be in a better position to understand more complicated forms like white papers, let's say, reports, even PowerPoint presentations. It all kind of ties together. Once you learn that sort of meta skill. So I could see some value in that. Again, though, the problem is why film noir? You could say that about any genre, right? Why not have them study resumes instead? But anyway, maybe this next part will cover that. So it is, of course, about fiction, genre fiction, as one of several genres, canonical text. It seems like, when I think about these courses in, say, a survey of American literature, there's not a lot of questions asked about these. Some people do. But these canonical texts, like, for example, what did she mention? The Great Gatsby. It's almost as if you were teaching a course in modern or whatever century the time period is, something like The Great Gatsby, you could put that on the syllabus. Nobody would really question it. It just seems to belong there, right? That's the definition of a canonical text. Whereas when you want to bring in something unusual, like these hard-boiled detective stories, then you kind of have to backpedal a little bit and try to justify it. See, I would say that you should have to make an argument to put anything on there. Just the fact that it's always been done that way doesn't really work for me. I like a little bit more of some type of rationale for it. Even if it is just this is a text that people will assume that you've read. I mean, that is some kind of reason, right? But there's a little bit more here. So an investigation of detective literature's origins in the 19th century. So I guess there's kind of historical value, maybe a little cultural studies value there. The adaptation of pulp fiction novels to films. Now that's where we're starting to get into some interesting territory, I think. Maybe there's some value in students seeing how works that begin in prose form become films and what might be gained or lost in the process. That could get into some interesting media studies. Thinking about something like maybe McLuhan would have something to contribute there in terms of media, different mediums. But it's just a lot to grapple with in this sentence. So I've try to poke at it a little bit. I'll let you do the same. And just what do you make of this? And I think that will do it for this kind of a short piece. Like lots of one thing I will say that I liked about this essay were all the questions, and a couple of people had mentioned that already. She seems to be asking all the right questions, very intriguing questions. It's not hard to see how these questions could lead to very fruitful discussion in the classroom. So anyway, lots of more stuff we're going to get to in this book. So see you next time.